He came home ready to share a breakthrough that could change the world. But instead, he discovered his wife was living a secret life with another man. He walked away without a word. But what they mistook for weakness was the beginning of a calculated revenge. I arrived in Chicago 3 hours ahead of schedule. My plane touched down at exactly 1:03 p.m., but my thoughts were already thousands of miles away. As I moved through the terminal, my mind churned with anticipation. After years of tireless work, I had finally developed a water purification system that could change lives, millions of them. Not just a career milestone, but something that could shift the global narrative around clean water access. The weight of my briefcase seemed lighter than usual, although I knew the documents inside it were worth more than gold. I couldn't wait to see Emily. She had been there through the long nights, the missed dinners, the silences while I obsessed over technical equations and efficiency metrics. I wanted her to know it hadn't been for nothing. I was finally ready to give her a reason to believe that everything we sacrificed had meaning. I caught a cab, barely registering the driver's small talk, my fingers rhythmically tapping on the leather handle of the case beside me. We passed familiar intersections, and eventually, the car pulled up in front of our apartment building. Modest but full of memories. I paid the fare, grabbed my luggage, and took the stairs 2 at a time, excitement thrumming through every step. Then I heard her. Her voice came through the door before I even touched the key. Soft but sharp, every syllable cutting into me like a blade. She wasn't alone. Another voice came faintly through the wall, a male tone that was far too familiar. Dread settled in before I could even register the words. "I can't keep doing this, Derek," she said, her tone tired but firm. "Max is always lost in his work. He lives in his head, in his ideas. What about me? My life? My need for something real?" I stood frozen, key in hand. My heart didn't just sink. It shattered mid-beat. I had been so consumed with building something for both of us. I hadn't realized she was already tearing it all down. She continued, her words cruel in their certainty. "You're right. I deserve better. I want passion, not plans. Adventure, not projections." Everything tilted. The hallway spun, and I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. It felt like someone had punched the air out of me, yet I was still standing. I didn't hesitate much longer. I turned the key and walked inside. Emily spun around, eyes wide, face drained of color. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the briefcase or demand answers. I simply placed it gently on the table. She stammered, searching for some lie, but I had already heard the truth. So much of what I believed about my life began to fall away in that moment. The foundation we had supposedly built together now revealed its cracks. She said she was suffocating, that I'd forgotten what it meant to truly live, that Derek made her feel seen, that they were going away together soon, to the Canary Islands, a place we once dreamed of visiting. Every sentence she spoke seemed rehearsed, as if she'd told herself this story enough times that it had become her truth. I listened. I asked questions that didn't need answers. I wanted her to say something that would make me believe this wasn't real. But it was. Then came the final blow. Her voice calm, almost too calm. "I want a divorce." There was no anger in her eyes anymore. Just certainty. I nodded, my jaw tight. I felt a storm within me, but I kept it leashed. I turned and headed for the bedroom, pulling out a suitcase and tossing in clothes without caring if they were folded. She followed, words tumbling out now, logistics, arrangements, appearances. I told her it would all go through lawyers. That's what she wanted, after all. When I walked out that door, I didn't look back. The air outside was cold, though the sky was clear. I called for a ride and gave the address of a nearby hotel. As we pulled away from the building, I looked out at the city I thought I knew. The place where my life had been neatly mapped out, where every step had a purpose. But I was wrong. I wasn't just betrayed. I had been discarded, reduced to a stepping stone in someone else's search for excitement. Yet, in the midst of the pain, something else emerged. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. They thought they could break me, leave me behind as collateral damage. But they didn't know what I had become. And that was their first mistake. The hotel room was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. I barely remembered checking in. The walls felt sterile, silent. A blank slate, perhaps too fitting for the version of myself I was becoming. I had come back to share my greatest achievement with the woman I loved. Instead, I found betrayal hiding in plain sight. But I didn't allow myself to collapse. Not for long. The next morning, I was back at my temporary desk, files spread out in controlled chaos. My water purification prototype sat in the center, a physical reminder that I still had something worth fighting for. The betrayal had burned through me like wildfire, but instead of reducing me to ash, it hardened something inside. I didn't know what to call it yet. Purpose, maybe, or survival. Every ounce of pain was fuel now. The calls started that week. Meetings were scheduled. Presentations rehearsed. I worked with a precision that unsettled even me. No distractions, no time for grief. I transformed my pain into productivity, burying everything else beneath layers of planning and execution. There was one constant through it all, Nora Chin, my colleague and longtime friend. We had worked side by side for nearly a decade in environmental engineering, pushing boundaries in our field while navigating bureaucracies that preferred the status quo. If I was the fire, Nora was the ice, calm, focused, always asking the right questions. She noticed the change immediately. Everyone did. I wasn't the same man anymore. The easy laughter had vanished, replaced by a sharpness that made people choose their words carefully. But Nora, she didn't back away. One evening, after most of the office had emptied, I was still at my desk. The room buzzed with fluorescent silence. Nora pulled up a chair next to me. "You've been living here lately," she said, her tone gentle but direct. "Is this really about the project, Max?" I didn't look up at first. "It has to be. It's the only thing left that matters." She stayed quiet for a moment. Then, "You matter. Your work matters. But not because of what happened. Because of what it can become." I met her eyes. For the first time in weeks, I allowed a crack in the armor. That same night, she told me something that shifted everything. "There's interest," she said, her voice more energized than I'd heard it in months. "Global Horizon Partners. They're a hospitality conglomerate. They want to talk about implementing your system across all their island resorts. They're serious." The name rang in my mind like a bell. Global Horizon. Their reach was massive, from the Caribbean to Southeast Asia. If they adopted our tech, we could scale instantly. "They're flying in next Thursday," Nora continued. "This could be it, Max." That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I mapped out every possible scenario, every angle. I ran simulations, adjusted figures, rewrote slides. I didn't just want to impress them. I wanted to dominate the conversation, to leave no doubt. By the time the day of the meeting arrived, I was more than ready. Nora and I walked into the downtown conference suite like we owned the place. She wore calm like a tailored jacket. I wore purpose like armor. The executives from Global Horizon were polite but skeptical, until I began to speak. I laid out every facet of the system. How it filtered, how it sustained, how it saved. I showed them the real-world impact. Rural communities gaining access to water, resorts reducing waste by over 40%, maintenance costs slashed by half. But I didn't sell the product. I sold the future. And I told them I had no intention of giving it away without conditions. After the final slide faded, the room was silent. Then came the nods, the handshakes, the murmurs of agreement. By the end of that meeting, they were no longer asking if, only how soon. And that's when I made my move. "I'm open to a full acquisition," I told their lead negotiator. "But there's one clause I require in the final agreement." He raised an eyebrow. "I want operational control of one property," I said. "The Aurora Blue Resort, located on a private island off the coast of Tahiti." A ripple of surprise passed through the room. They didn't ask why. Not yet. But I could feel their curiosity clawing at them like heat under the collar. They agreed to discuss it. And that was enough. Nora and I left the meeting in silence. Once we were on the street, she turned to me with a look that held equal parts pride and worry. "You're going after them, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The road ahead was already unfolding before me. Not just success, but justice. The kind that wasn't served in courtrooms or emails. The kind that came quietly, strategically, and left no trace. They had tried to erase me. Now I was going to become the storm they never saw coming. The contract had been signed just 2 days earlier, and already I was on a plane to Tahiti, staring through the cabin window at a vast expanse of blue. The ocean stretched endlessly below, but my focus was locked on something far beyond the horizon. The island, the resort, the two people who thought they had escaped accountability. I wasn't coming for revenge. Not exactly. This was about clarity, about setting things right, and yes, about making sure they never forgot what they'd broken. I landed late in the afternoon, heat wrapping around me like a humid warning. A tall man in a crisp suit met me at the terminal. Owen Blake, the resort manager. He welcomed me with a handshake that was just a bit too firm, as if to assert control. I let him talk as he led me to the car, listing off resort features, occupancy stats, guest feedback trends. None of it mattered. I was already dissecting the place before I even saw it. The drive wound through thick jungle and coastal bends. When we finally arrived at the Aurora Blue Resort, the sun was beginning to set, casting the bungalows in a rich golden glow. Everything looked perfect on the surface. But that's how all illusions begin. Polished and quiet, until something stirs beneath. I kept my questions simple, professional. We discussed the integration of my filtration system, the rollout plan, the projected savings. Owen was efficient, competent. He had no idea the true purpose behind my visit. The truth revealed itself within 24 hours. A casual review of the staff records confirmed what I already suspected. Derek, now using a slightly modified last name, worked the evening bar shift. His experience was embellished, the gaps in his resume disguised poorly. Emily, on the other hand, held a customer relations position that placed her in daily contact with high-paying guests. Her record was cleaner, her lies more refined. Typical. I watched first. I wanted to see how far they'd fallen or how comfortable they'd become. Derek poured drinks by the pool, moving like someone who used to think he was special. There was a tiredness to him, like life had slowly peeled away the parts he once bragged about. His movements were sloppy, his posture unsure. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, he froze mid-pour. A full second passed before the glass slipped and shattered. I didn't acknowledge him. Not yet. Instead, I turned to Owen and made a casual remark about employee background verification. Nothing accusatory. Not yet. That evening, alone in my suite, I read through more internal reports. The numbers were good. The resort was thriving, but just beneath the surface, there was rot. Corners cut. Hires made without diligence. Derek was just one example. There were others. I compiled a list, noted each inconsistency, and began restructuring protocols in silence. No confrontations, no drama, just precision. Emily eventually saw me. She was entering the main lobby when our paths crossed. Her expression changed instantly, recognition, then disbelief, then something bordering on fear. She didn't speak. Neither did I. No words needed. She knew exactly why I was here. Derek didn't last another 48 hours. Owen removed him professionally, citing the falsified documents. Emily remained. That was intentional. She needed to see what came next. I made myself visible, held meetings in open lounges, ate meals near the guest walkways, oversaw renovations during peak hours. My presence became a signal. Things were changing, quickly and without negotiation. Word spread across the island that a new stakeholder was leading the transformation. Some staff were cautious, others intrigued. I let the system speak for me: faster service delivery, cleaner energy usage, smarter guest feedback processes. I turned the resort into a prototype of the future. And while I did, I let Emily drift in the shadow of her choices. There was no public humiliation, no threats, just results. That's always more effective. By the end of the first week, guest satisfaction was up 12%. Operating costs had already dipped. Sustainability reviews showed progress. Staff morale surprisingly improved. No one missed Derek. Most never even learned his name. I kept my distance from Emily. There was no need to engage. She felt the shift, the way her space within the resort shrank day by day. The leadership meetings she used to be invited to? Gone. Her access to certain systems? Quietly revoked. She was still employed, technically. But the position she once held no longer existed in any meaningful way. And all of it happened quietly. No confrontation, no spectacle. Control doesn't need to shout. They had both rewritten my story once, without permission. Now I was editing theirs, line by line, until there was nothing left but a footnote in my chapter. The resort had begun to breathe differently. I could feel it in the way the staff moved, the way guests lingered longer near the water features powered by my systems, the way Owen greeted me each morning with increasing respect and just a touch of awe. The Aurora Blue was no longer a luxury escape. It was becoming a case study in reinvention. But beneath the surface, the old ghosts stirred. I had anticipated resistance. People like Emily and Derek didn't just disappear quietly. They clung to relevance, to the illusion that they still mattered. Predictably, their descent into irrelevance birthed desperation. At first, it was subtle. Whispers among the staff. Discreet glances when I entered a room. Then came the rumors, little stories crafted in shadows. That I'd bought the resort out of spite. That I was unstable. That the technology one implemented wasn't as sustainable as I claimed. One of the guests even pulled me aside. Concerned, after overhearing Emily suggest I had once been hospitalized for a stress-related collapse. Impressive, considering I'd never missed a day of work in 2 years. Meanwhile, Derek, now reduced to sneaking back onto the property to speak with employees during breaks, planted seeds among the junior staff. Warnings about job losses, fears about my intentions, claims that the resort's image was about to implode under poor leadership. I let them talk, because while they whispered, I built. The systems I'd installed cut operating costs by nearly 30% in the first month. We launched a pilot project with local vendors to supply organic produce, increasing guest satisfaction scores dramatically. Guest retention rates went up. Cancellation rates dropped. The resort began receiving coverage in sustainability publications and industry newsletters. Gilbert Mason, the CEO of Global Horizon, called me personally with an offer to replicate the model across their top-tier resorts in the Maldives, Seychelles, and Mauritius. But I wasn't done. I knew Emily and Derek would push harder, and I gave them just enough space to believe they were succeeding. I made a show of looking tired, left paperwork visible at the reception desk, spoke loudly about system errors and overbookings in public spaces. It was bait, and they took it. They brought in someone, a friend of Derek's, a failed IT contractor with just enough knowledge to be dangerous. Together, they began trying to breach the reservation system, create chaos, double-book rooms, delete VIP profiles, trigger refund requests. What they didn't know was that I had spent weeks working with our IT lead to build a honeypot, a fake portal mimicking the resort's backend. Every click they made was tracked, every keystroke logged. By the third day, I had more than enough evidence. The night they celebrated their success, I stood in the shadows outside their apartment, not to spy, but simply to observe. Cheap champagne, laughter filled with arrogance, toasts to my downfall. They still hadn't learned. When the knock came, it wasn't mine. It was the island police, escorted by 2 Global Horizon security officers. Their faces fell before the words were spoken. Charges were read, devices confiscated. Emily's expression flickered between denial and fury. Derek simply slumped, his shoulders folding inward. I didn't approach them. I didn't speak. I let the law handle what emotion once wanted to solve. Their arrest wasn't a moment of triumph. It was just the natural conclusion to a series of poor choices. The next morning, the resort was quiet, tense but curious. So I addressed everyone. No grand speech. Just a simple morning meeting where I explained, calmly and factually, that the reservation issue had been resolved, that a few former employees had acted against company interests, and that we were moving forward. Stronger, more secure, more united. There was no applause, But there was something better. Stillness. Trust. The kind that doesn't require words to validate. After the meeting, Owen approached me. "I've never seen leadership like that," he said, voice low, eyes steady. "You didn't flinch once." But inside, I had felt everything. Rage, sorrow, release. I just chose not to show it. Emily and Derek were gone. Not erased, but irrelevant. Their story ended not with fury, but with silence. No headlines, no drama, just consequences. And I had work to do. We'd barely scratched the surface of what this resort could become. The next steps were already in motion, expanding the water system to the neighboring islands, onboarding new partners, rebranding the Aurora Blue as the world's first fully self-sustaining luxury resort. The revenge wasn't in their arrest. It was in my success, and the fact that they'd have to watch it all unfold from the outside, powerless to stop it. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the ocean in soft amber. I stood barefoot in the warm sand outside the Aurora Blue Resort, the salt air filling my lungs. The waves moved with a calm rhythm, as if echoing the new steadiness in my life. 2 years ago, my world had collapsed without warning. Now, it had rebuilt itself into something stronger, sharper, and far more deliberate. The past months had transformed the resort into a global benchmark. Energy-efficient systems powered every building. Water usage had dropped so significantly that regional partners asked for consultations. The eco-luxury model we designed became the new standard, and reservations booked out months in advance. But beyond the numbers, there was something else. A quiet certainty that everything, the betrayal, the struggle, the long nights hunched over prototypes, had led to this exact moment. I wasn't just surviving. I was leading, owning, thriving. Nora arrived 2 days after Emily and Derek were removed from the island. I hadn't asked her to come. She simply knew it was time. She had always known how to read between the lines of my silences. Seeing her step onto the dock, luggage in one hand, wind teasing her hair, I felt a shift. Not a dramatic one, more like gravity adjusting its center. She belonged in this chapter of my life, not as a colleague or distant friend, but as someone who had witnessed it all and stayed. We spent hours walking the property, not speaking much, just absorbing. Nora noticed the little things others overlooked, where the palm trees cast the right kind of shade, where the filtration unit's hum could be muffled without compromising airflow. She always saw more than most. I remember the evening we sat on the deck outside my suite, the air thick with stars. She asked if I was at peace. Caught me off guard. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I did. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fix something broken. I wasn't fighting to prove I was enough. I simply was. I'd lost something I once thought irreplaceable. But in its absence, I had discovered deeper truths about loyalty, vision, and the quiet kind of strength that doesn't need validation. The news about Emily and Derek barely rippled in the industry. No press. No sympathy. Just a clean removal and a tightening of hiring protocols. They faded from relevance faster than they ever expected. I didn't track them. I didn't need to. Some ruins are better left untouched. Gilbert Mason called me again, this time not to offer anything, but to thank me. The board had voted to expand the sustainability model across all Global Horizon resorts. I'd be overseeing implementation personally, traveling across oceans, building new teams. I accepted, but on my terms. I would remain anchored here. Aurora Blue would stay my base. My proof that redemption isn't given. It's built. The staff trusted me now. Not out of obligation, but because they had seen what I was willing to do for this place. I worked beside them, cleaned tables when needed, solved plumbing issues without calling for contractors. I was their leader not because I claimed authority, but because I earned it. And Nora? She became more than a presence. She became essential. Her insights, her calm logic, the way she challenged my blind spots. It was like discovering a part of myself that had been missing. We never rushed it. There were no declarations. Just moments that deepened, one after the other, until it became impossible to imagine the future without her in it. One evening, We walked the length of the beach under a sky scattered with stars. As we passed the far edge of the property, I looked back at the resort, glowing softly, alive with quiet purpose, and realized I had won a war without ever shouting. Revenge had never been about destruction. It was about restoration, and mine was complete. Not long after, we sat in the boardroom with Gilbert and the other executives. The plan was ambitious: full regional transformation within 18 months. I laid out the logistics. Nora handled the system's architecture. We spoke in tandem seamlessly like we always had. But now the stakes were higher and we were ready. When the meeting ended, Gilbert pulled me aside. "You've turned this place into a legend," he said. "Whatever you need, it's yours." I didn't ask for money. I asked for freedom. The freedom to lead on my terms, to expand responsibly, to choose my team. And they agreed. Later that night, back on the beach, I turned to Nora and asked something I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times, though never aloud. It wasn't a proposal, not exactly. Just an invitation to explore something more beyond business, beyond the past. She smiled, simple and sure. And that's when I knew. I hadn't just reclaimed my life. I had rewritten it. With her by my side, the world didn't feel like something I had to conquer anymore. It felt like something we could build, together.